Today is September 11th. It's the 254th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. As with any day, there are thousands upon thousands of events, births, deaths, observances that occur on this day, spanning the whole course of history. But since 2001, here in America, and in most of the world, September 11th means one thing. The September 11th terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The events of the day are just too massive for me to tackle in the simple format of this podcast, so forgive me for not even trying. There are countless stories from this day in 2001 that are told time and time again, as they should be. Stories of the victims, the heroic police and firefighters who charge up the stairs of the towers knowing this is a call like no other call they've ever been on. Stories of the survivors and of the self-sacrifice. Stories of the coincidences, the people who were supposed to be in the towers but were late to work or had a meeting canceled, and the people who came into work earlier than they usually do. The stories are told now in museums across the country, in books, and TV shows. There are plenty of documentaries and news programs available that show news footage of the attacks, as well as some home videos taken from all around the New York and the DC areas. But there's no other film I've ever seen that puts you right there on the ground, in the middle of the World Trade Center as it's all happening. Nothing quite like the documentary 9/11 by Jules and Gideon Naudet. On this day in 2001, the Naudet brothers, two French-born filmmakers, are filming a documentary about a probationary firefighter at the firehouse on Duane Street in Lower Manhattan. At the time, Gideon is the filmmaker, the cinematographer, and his brother Jules is the producer or the sound guy, or he does a little bit of everything else, which is what you do when you're making a no-budget documentary. Sometime after 8 a.m. on this morning, Jules goes out with several firefighters on a call about a gas leak. Gas leaks are not the most exciting calls, but Jules tags along to practice his camera work. At 8:46 a.m., Jules and the firefighters hear the loud sound of a jet overhead. Jules follows the sound with the camera and captures the only images of American Airlines Flight 11 as it crashes into the North Tower. The firefighters race to the Trade Center, and Jules goes right along with them and films the entire attack start to finish from inside the World Trade Center towers. As the second plane hits, as loud banging sounds are heard that no one can figure out what they are until they realize it's the sound of people who moments before had been on the top floors of the towers. As the first tower crumbles, and then the second, and Lower Manhattan is consumed by a deathly quiet cloud of the disintegrated towers and all that they contained. The film that Jules and Gideon Naudet make from this footage is exceptionally powerful. It's disturbing, and it's incredibly important. It doesn't explain what happened. It doesn't give global context to the attacks. It doesn't possess hindsight or the ability to categorize the attacks in the grander scheme of the war on terror. It is simply a document of what it was like inside the World Trade Center on this horrible day. And because of that, it is the single most important document of the September 11th attacks. It's often said of 9/11, never forget. But that doesn't necessarily mean we remember. Time passes, and memories fade. They're still there, there's still an impression, but it may not be the strong, vivid memory that it once was. And over time, 9/11 becomes a thing that is talked about. something in the distance, something that happened, was unbelievable and hard to imagine it could happen again. And there's a whole generation now who weren't born yet, or were too young to understand what was happening on this day in 2001. I wasn't in New York or Virginia, but I remember watching the news live as the events unfolded. I remember that the news reporters did an amazing job reporting the events in real time, but with a fair amount of misinformation, which is to be expected. I remember the news that a bomb went off at the State Department, and then another at the Capitol. I remember Delta Flight 1989 that was believed to be hijacked but wasn't. I remember the reports of 10 or more hijacked airplanes. I remember the reports of imminent threats to other cities, Los Angeles, Seattle, wondering, is my city next? I remember the next few days when there wasn't a plane in the sky. An unprecedented ground stop, the entire airspace over the US and Canada closed to all commercial and general air traffic. All except for that lone fighter jet that we'd see circling overhead every hour or so. I remember going to New York 2 months to the day after the attacks to see the astronomical pile of rubble for myself. It was like a ghost town for blocks around Ground Zero. Abandoned stores, every square inch inside covered with a thick layer of granulated debris. I remember all these little bits, but over time they moved further back in my brain. There's now so much information about September 11th. So much disinformation and conspiracy theories that I think we collectively have lost touch with the reality of what actually happened on this day in 2001. Which is why I watch the Naudet brothers film 9/11 every year. I think everyone should watch this film to get as close as possible to the experience of the day, or just to refresh your memory. I know that I still have the vivid memory of that day. But every year when I rewatch this film, I realize that a little bit more of that memory has slipped away. There are 111 days left in the year,